Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting the Mary Jane Watson and Harry Osborn miniatures from Marvel Zombies. Using the sprays from Colourforge, I sprayed Mary Jane with matte black and Harry with matte white. I'm going to kick things off with Harry and I'm going to use some rust grey to paint in his jeans, which we've given a wash with some Drakenhof Nightshade. While that dries, I'm going to paint MJ's trousers with some Morghast Bone. These will then get washed with some Army Painter Soft Tone. I'm then going to use some rust grey to relayer the rust grey on Harry, but being very careful to avoid the recesses. Then I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of rust grey and Fenrisian grey for the highlight. For Harry's jumper, I'm going to use some Moot Green. And for his jacket, I'm going to use some Deathweld Forest. All of this will then get a wash with some Athonian Camo Shade. MJ's wash should now be dry, so I'm going to relayer her trousers with some Morghast Bone. Then I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Morghast Bone and Wraithbone for the highlight. I'm then going to use some Carrick Stone to paint her jacket that she's holding in her arms. And then I'll give it a wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. Once the wash was dry on Harry's jumper, I then went ahead and mixed in some matte white to the Moot Green for a 50-50 ratio for the highlight. I then relayered the Deathweld Forest, avoiding all the recesses. The first highlight was a 70-30 mix of Deathweld Forest and Ogryn Camo in favour of the Deathweld Forest. The second highlight was the same mix, but at a 50-50 ratio. I then used Wraithbone to paint the shirt underneath Harry's jumper, which was followed by the first highlight, which was Wraithbone mixed with matte white for a 50-50 ratio, which was then followed by matte white all by itself. I then relayered MJ's jacket with some Carrick Stone, and this was highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Carrick Stone and Wraithbone. I then used Rhinox Hide to paint her belt, and then did a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Doombull Brown for the highlight. I then used some Iron Hand Steel to paint her belt buckle, and I also used it to paint the tiny little sort of rivets that are on her belt. You want to be very careful with that part though, as they are very, very small. I then gave the buckle of her belt a wash with some Nuln Oil. I then used some Abaddon Black to neaten up the boots that she's wearing as well as her top. And I then gave her boots, and only her boots, a wash with some Nuln Oil. Her top was then highlighted with some Corvus Black, followed by a 50-50 mix of Corvus Black and Eshin Grey. I then used that very same mix to paint Harry's shoes, which then received a wash with some Nuln Oil. Next up was the skin, and for that I used some Bugman's Glow. As I want Mary Jane to have a little bit lighter skin and not so harsh shading, I only used Reikland's Flesh Shade on Harry. Once that shade was dry, I then used some Abaddon Black to paint the eyes, followed by some matte white, and then finally Abaddon Black again for the pupils. I'm now going to move back to the skin, and for that I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Bugman's Glow. This will be followed by Cadian Flesh Tone just by itself, then a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh, before a final highlight of Kislev Flesh just by itself. Now this is used a lot more on MJ than it was on Harry. I then used Gal Volbak Red to paint MJ's hair. This was washed with some Nuln Oil. And for Harry I used some Mornfang Brown, followed by a wash of Agrax Earthshade. I then used Eshin Grey to highlight Harry's shoes, and then painted in his shoelaces with some matte white. I then did a 70-30 mix of Gal 4-back red and matte white to highlight MJ's hair. I used some Morghast bone to paint Harry's base, and gave it a quick dry brush with some wraith bone. MJ's base was painted with Dawnstone, and then it was highlighted with a dry brush of grey cere. I then used a Baden black to paint the rims of both bases, before finally washing the base with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. That's MJ and Harry done. Unfortunately, you can only get Harry if you back the Kickstarter. You might be able to find him on eBay. I'm not entirely sure. However, they are fun, fast little models to paint. So fast, in fact, that it only took me about 4 hours to complete the pair. As I said, both very nice figures, and I had a lot of fun. I always have a lot of fun painting Come On stuff. I think they do a very good job. If you enjoyed the video and it sort of helped you in any way, I hope you think about subscribing and maybe giving the video a thumbs up and possibly a share if you can, and I would be forever grateful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.